Howdy and welcome to episode 71 of T-Shirts and Shawls. I'm Karen and today is Thursday, February 28th, 2019. So I saw a funny meme earlier today. It said something like, I vow not to buy yarn on the 3 days of February 29th, February 30th, and February 31st, 2019. That's something I can get behind. I can do that. Anyway, so welcome. I went on a knitting retreat over the previous weekend, so I'll be talking about that today. I've got some knitting and even some spinning, a little spoiler alert there, to talk about that I did over the retreat, and some roundtable yarn stuff. I've got kind of a big section planned on reading and watching, what I've been reading and watching, and then I'll show you, if you maybe you've seen the picture in the Ravelry group. If not, I will show you the prizes for the first quarter knit along. So that is what is in store for you guys today. So the Winter Fiber Fun Retreat was this past weekend, and overall I had a good time. I will say the hotel itself left a lot to be desired. The building was being renovated, and it was there were some areas that were almost a little scary to walk down. Getting to the elevator on the first floor was interesting. And the hotel changed hands, changed ownership the day we arrived. So I think some of the things that had been communicated to basically the hotel that we'd been contracted with were not fully communicated to the new owners. So there were some hiccups. But fortunately the company was good. The classes were great. And I got to, spend a lot of time knitting and a little time spinning. So I will show you more of what I was spinning in its own separate section, but I want to talk a little bit about the retreat. Basically, it was set up where it was one big ballroom where there were several vendors. So I had a table there while he's on his way up, hopefully not up high. So basically tables and booths throughout the room. I think we're about half a dozen vendors or so. Here's Wally. There we go. Say hi. So that room was kind of the gathering room for everyone. So there were tables set up in the middle and people, and then spinners kind of set up a circle of spinning. And basically that's the main hangout place for the entire weekend, which as a vendor it was a little unusual because, I mean, my table was there and I was technically open, available to sell pretty much anytime that room was open. So in some ways I felt like I was a little bit tied to my table, my booth, because I wanted to make sure I was there if someone had any questions or wanted to buy something. But also, I did like move around. I didn't stay there the entire weekend, but I did stay there a good chunk of the weekend. So in some ways I did feel that made me feel a little bit separated. And I'm not really sure exactly, this is my first time at this retreat, so I'm not really sure exactly how to navigate that. Both that I am part of the retreat, I am a knitter and a spinner, but I was also being a vendor. So that might be something to think about in future. I taught 2 classes. I think if you've watched the podcast, I mentioned what I was teaching. Beginning cables. So there were 2 women who had never cabled before, and so I got to teach them how to do that, and that was exciting. Especially the moment of, oh, okay, now I'm getting it. Now it's actually looking like something. Look what I've accomplished. That's always really fun. And then I taught a class all about the yarn. Okay, now if you hear noise, Wally is hiding and Luna is trying to get to him. So if you hear some noise in the background, that's what's going on. So all about the yarn, where I basically brought in lots of swatches and samples of projects, both good and bad yarn choices for projects. Talked about the difference in what is a single ply versus 2 ply versus 3 or more plies versus a cable ply. Or those types of things. Looked at twist, how tight a twist the yarn has, and a lot of different things about fiber content. Hang on just a second. Luna! Oh, I see. Wally's in a plastic box, so Luna can look in and see him, but she's having a hard time getting to him. Anyway, So yeah, so I had all the swatches and examples, and then I also gave each person in the class a set of about 10 grams of lots of different yarns for them to play with. Mostly afterwards. I don't think anyone actually cast on during the class because I threw a lot of information at them. So I think it was more, absorbing information and looking at all of the examples. But I was really excited about that class. That is a class that I've kind of been dreaming about, that type of class. I got to do the little presentation for the Dallas Guild. And then now I got to expand it into a 3-hour class. And that's something that I want to do more of because I really do think it's important to know about the yarn that you're using and which yarn might be better for which projects. So that's either a class itself that I want to potentially teach again at other places, or maybe break it down and do things in my newsletter. I did a little snippet of part of the class and the newsletter that I went out this week, but I just want that information and the actual, examples, being able to see them and see all the different yarns and compare the examples. So I'm going to kind of maybe think about ways that I could kind of share that maybe with more people. Anyway, so this is the classes I taught, and then I took one class. I took a class on tatting. So tatting is something that, I've seen other people do, and it always looked really interesting, but also very, because usually the threads that are used for tatting are very, very thin, so it just seems very delicate. So since there was a class on tatting, I thought I have to take that because maybe I'll see if I like it, if I don't, but it would be fun to at least try. So this is my first attempt at tatting. So we started out, basically there are two main parts to, I don't know if you call it the tatting stitch, but two main parts. So the first part here of my little sample is this little curly cue, because we were just learning the first half of the tatting stitch. So it was curling. And then when you put the second half on, you start to get a straighter line. So less of a curly cue and more of a straight line. Then we learned how to do these little picots. And I don't know I have my usual lighting set up, but for some reason it doesn't seem to, it seems to be a little bit different today. So I don't know if my light bulb is, maybe needs to be replaced soon or what, but I apologize about the lighting. But we learned these little picots, so you can see the little points there. And then we learned how to do rings. So here was my first attempt at a ring, this strand of yarn here. I messed up and my ring was no longer, because you want to be able to adjust the ring so you can close it. My ring was no longer adjusting, so I did something wrong and I just abandoned that one and then moved on and did these other ones. So there's that one, did teeny tiny little ring there, and then this little ring. We also did learn how to join the rings, so using the little picots, but I never got to the point where I actually did that myself, but that is also something to do. And then I attempted another little piece where I was doing kind of a straighter line and then a ring and then back to the straight line and the ring, and then I was going to do another ring and connect them here, but I just I didn't do that at the retreat. If you've never heard of tatting, basically it uses these shuttles, and you're not exactly creating, I guess you're kind of creating knots, but not exactly knots because they do slide, but it was really fascinating, and it was to get the motion where you're, you're holding the tatting thing, and to get the motion of how you're moving the tatting shuttle was a little awkward at first. It was something where I felt like my hands were fumbling around quite a bit. But the more like with everything, the more practice, the more I felt a little bit more natural. But it still does feel pretty awkward with your hands. So the woman teaching it basically had a helper. So Rita is the woman who taught, and then Elisa, who was a knitting fairy, was helping. And so Elisa said that when she had to have some physical therapy on her, I don't know if it was, I think it was one hand. And so she had to bring to her physical therapist all of her crafting things to show the physical therapist to see, you know, is this something that I can continue doing? So she brought in knitting, and the physical therapist was like, yep, knitting's good. Crochet was okay, but you can crochet. I think she brought in spinning. I don't remember what the third thing was. And then she brought in tatting, and the physical therapist said, "What are you doing?" And Lisa's like, "I'm tatting." That is the most horrible thing I have ever seen anyone do to their hands. So it is just because you're kind of pinching and you're kind of moving things around. It really is kind of manipulating your hands in some ways that you're not really used to. So if you're interested in tatting, we actually started out kind of doing some finger exercises, and just take breaks, you know, pretty frequently, so that way you don't hurt your hands. That's something really important. So I don't know that I'm going to necessarily do a lot of tatting in the future. There was one other person in the class, Alyssa, who she picked up on it really, really well, and she went on and actually did, after the class, she continued tatting and made this really gorgeous butterfly. So she seemed to really get that, get the thing. But if I am going to continue on, Rita was so generous and gave us so many things. So we have like this huge little container that had tools in it, this tin that had these little scissors and a little tatting needle gauge and a bunch of other stuff. She gave us so much thread. I mean, I have a bag down here, so much tatting thread. I mean, I really wouldn't have to buy anything unless there's a color that I didn't get from her that I would want, which I got a lot of different colors. So I wouldn't really have to buy anything for a while. I'm kind of set up. So if I want to continue tatting, I've got a lot of tools and threads that I can use. So I will probably do it here and there, just to, you know, make sure that I don't forget, because it is, I think it is fun, but I don't know that it's gonna, you know, go up there on my list of top crafts that I'm doing, but I'm glad that I learned. Anyway, so that was kind of what happened at the retreat. Which the hotel had been better, but at least the retreat itself was pretty good. For what I'm knitting, I don't really have anything new that I've cast on. I'm just trying to make some progress on projects that are currently on my needles. So I made a little more progress on Birds of a Feather. So there's all of it now. I am just ready to start the next mohair section. I have 3 more mohair sections. And so I guess that's 4 more of the just the regular fingering weight yarn sections. So I should be able, I've got a little over a month now, I should be able to finish that in time for DFW Fiber Fest, so it can be a sample. That's kind of the reason why I'm not starting new things, even though there are so many things that I want to start, especially brioche things. I want to make sure that I get this done in time for DFW Fiber Fest. So that's Birds of a Feather. Then I am also picked back up my 3 sheets shawl, because I want that to also be a sample for DFW Fiber Fest. Let me show you the front side so you can see the cables. So this one has definitely grown a lot, I hope, since the last time that you saw it. Nope, that is the wrong side. This way. Yeah, there we go, the cables. So that one has grown. It goes on to the beginning. I am at the point where I have, I think it's 6 more rows of the body, and then, which side, this is the edge, and then basically there are, I think it's 32 rows of, so I'm halfway through. This is a 16 row pattern, so I have 8 rows from the, from finishing the body. So 8 rows from finishing the body, and then 32 rows that will finish out the shawl. And I think what it does, I looked at the pattern, is this part still goes on as I've been doing, and this little section right here basically just decreases and eventually decreases down, so it meets up with the body. So it just creates a little bit of a shape there. Luna is still trying to get to the cats. Now both of the cats are teasing her. Luna! Come here, Luna. No, she really wants the cats. Anyway, oh, here she is. Okay, good girl. Good girl. Yeah. You want to say hi? Come here. Come here. Oh, here she is. She's got her little hoodie on today because it's a bit chilly. So, there you go. Oh, I get kisses. Okay. All right, back down. Good girl. All right, so 3-sheet shawl. Good girl. And so this, again, is something else that I want to use as a sample for DFW Fiber Fest. I'm going to have to clean off my glasses in a minute. And this is out of my Cornwall yarn base, which is DK 100% BFL, Blue Face Leicester. So that is kind of the thing that I've been putting the bulk of my time into right now because I really want to get that finished and off the needles. It's been on the needles for a while. I think it's probably one of my Q1, you know, finishing off a project that's been hanging over your head. So I think that will definitely be a Q1 entry. And then I do have the brioche project on my needles, Leslie Ann Robinson's Donita. So made a little bit more progress on that one. Front side, back side. This is with Magpie Fibers yarn. I don't think I've picked it up. I don't think I've picked it up since the retreat. So like I said, I really have been focusing on the 3-sheet shawl. I also have just the regular stockinette self-striping socks that I always have on my needles, using Mustache's Gin Airso colorway, which I just realized I left in the other room, so I didn't grab that to show you. But I did get all the way up through the heel, and now I'm on the foot of the first sock. I did a good chunk of that, a little bit at the retreat, and a good chunk at Knit Night. So I'm making pretty good progress on that pair of socks, but that's really what I've been knitting. Like I said, I've got things in my queue that I'm really itching to start, but I want to finish these 2 projects off that are supposed to be samples, because I'm going to blink and DFW Fiber Fest is going to be here before I know it. So I want to get those done, and then I will kind of have a cast on party, just of my own, and cast on some new projects that I've been itching to start. And maybe I will get back to Boxy, which unfortunately has, for whatever reason, no fault of its own, just for whatever reason, I haven't really been working on it. So as soon as I finish these 2, I will pull out Boxy as well and get back to work on it. So you haven't seen this section in a while, what I'm spinning, because to be honest, I haven't done a lot of spinning lately, which whenever I get back into it, I always tell myself, oh my gosh, why haven't I done any spinning? Because I find it so meditative, and it really does help when I'm feeling, especially when I'm feeling some anxiety and other things. If I can just sit down and spin, it really does help calm me. So I need to remember that more. But definitely seeing these spinners, and the spinners were kind of set up right in front of my table space at the retreat. Seeing them really got me in the mood to spin, so very happily I did bring my wheel with me, my Hanson, which is right here, the electric spinning wheel, and so I did a lot of spinning. So I actually didn't knit very much on the retreat, I mostly did spinning. So I finished the singles yarn for this that had been on my spinning wheel. I just looked it up on Ravelry, and I'm not going to tell you when I started it because it's a little embarrassing. I will just say it's over a year ago. Anyway, so the fiber is from, was dyed by Huckleberry Knits. I remember getting the fiber at Plyaway. I think it was the first Plyaway. And it is a Targhee silk blend. And Targhee is so, if you've watched the podcast, I have kind of said good things about Targhee before, just how bouncy it is and how wonderful. So I really enjoyed spinning this. I'm showing you this, but you can't see what all is underneath here. This was a gradient, so it's a really gorgeous color that's underneath. So now the next step is to ply it, and because I made it all as one big single, because I wanted to keep that gradient, I'm going to do what's called a chain ply, which in essence gets something that's similar to a 3-ply yarn, though it's definitely not quite a 3-ply. but that helps to keep the color progression. So the next step is to sit down and do the chain plying on this. And then you'll be able to actually see, when I pull that off, you'll be able to see the gradients and the beautiful colors, because it's pretty here, but there's so many colors that go throughout this. So some points I will ply this up and have that done. And then I started a new spinning project. So this is some fiber. So here's the fiber that's unspun. From Panorama Fiber Arts, and I love her yarn, her gradient yarn especially, but I have some of her fiber. So this is the Snazberry colorway, and I think I got this when the year that my husband and son and I just did this random trip to San Antonio one weekend, and it happened to be the weekend of Kid and You, a fiber festival, and so we made sure our trip kind of took us through that, so I got to spend a couple of hours at Kid and You, and I'm pretty sure that's where I bought this, but definitely around that same time period. So what I've done with this, so this is, the first half is on my wheel. I'm almost done with the first bobbin. I'm going to do a 2-ply. So 2 bobbins. So here's my wheel. This is a Hanson mini spinner. And so I'm almost done. Just have that much more of the fiber to do of the first bobbin. See, I did a lot of spinning. And then I have this one that I will spin on the second bobbin. And what I've done, sorry, I want to make sure the fiber's not snagging. What I did is, so this fiber came in what is called a braid. So basically it's this long, I don't want to call it a strand, basically a long thing of fibers. And the way it's dyed is it has these big blocks of color. So I decided to spin it as a fractal spin. So what that means is that I took the fiber and I split it, I don't want to do it with this, but I split it lengthwise. So basically I pulled this in half and split it all the way down the entire length, just kept splitting and splitting and splitting until I got 2 halves. And this is one of those halves. The other half, which is the one that I've already spun, I've left this one, this is the full half, and I'm not breaking it down anymore. The other one, I took its half, so it looked just like this, but I did split that one down more, and I ultimately ended up splitting that one into 5 different sections. And again, it's lengthwise, so it's, you know, pulling this apart here and going all the way down the length of the fiber. So I split it into 5 different sections, and I spun those one after the other. And what that does is, because it has these big blocks of color, when I'm spinning it, this half just completely straight, and I'm not breaking it down any further. I mean, I'm drafting, you know, I'm pulling it out and making it thinner, but I'm not doing the splitting thing. When I do that, I get long stretches of color. This will spread out and be, once I get it on the bobbin, it'll be a long stretch of color. Whereas the other one, where I split into 5 different sections, the stretches of color, so this, the stretch of color will be shorter because there's not as much fiber within that part of the color. So I'll have one bobbin full of a single that has shorter sections of color, and one bobbin that has long sections of color, so that when I ply the 2 together, at some points there will be barber pulling. I mean, these are very pinks and purples, so there's not going to be a lot of contrast, but there will be some barber pulling where maybe a pink and a purple are plying together. There will be other points where the colors are matching up, where maybe the 2 purples happen to match up in a section, and it'll just kind of jumble around the colors like that. And it's a really fun way of kind of playing with color in the spinning part of it. So that is the plan for that. Hopefully this won't sit here for another year. And I will actually be working on this and get that done, because what I would like to do, because I'm doing a 2-ply, that is really great for lace stitch patterns, and I am planning on doing a lacy shawl. Depending on how much yardage I get, I'm probably going to do one of the Anna Victoria shawls with it, especially since this is Panorama fiber, and one of my goals is doing Anna Victoria shawls in Panorama gradient cakes. It's not quite the same, but it's still Panorama, so it kind of meets that goal too. Anyway, so now Wally is going up high again and teasing Luna once more. So hopefully I won't let this sit for a year, because I do actually have plans for this one. But remind me, guys, I need to get this wheel out more often, because it really is enjoyable, and I really like spinning. So I have a trunk show that I've set up that's coming up this summer that I wanted to let you guys know about. In San Antonio, there is a yarn shop called Inskein Yarns, and I will link to the shop website in the show notes. And I was contacted by them to ask if I would be interested in doing a trunk show in July, and I said yes, that would be great. I know Brazen Stitchery has done trunk shows at this yarn shop, and it seems to have been a good experience, so I'm looking forward to it. So it is July 20th and 21st, a Saturday and Sunday, that I will be down in San Antonio at Inskein Yarns. So I'll have more details kind of as July gets closer, but that's something I'm excited about, and getting down to the San Antonio area. I think Jarrett might take a couple of days off work, and Luke will be out of school since it's summer, and maybe we'll make kind of a long weekend and do a trip down to San Antonio. The last time we went, I really liked the zoo down there, so I think that might be a fun little family trip, and then also do my trunk show. So the other thing, now that the retreat is over, okay, now the cats have moved to a different area, and Luna's over there. Hang on, Luna, come here. She was getting into something that she shouldn't be getting into. Come here. Good girl. Go get a toy. Where's your toy? So now that the retreat is over, I am focused pretty much solely on DFW Fiber Fest. I've been doing a lot of dyeing for it. I didn't have a lot of yarn at the retreat because I held back a bunch of what I do have for DFW Fiber Fest. So those blue IKEA bags, I have 5 that are stuffed completely full of yarn. And then they also have kind of these bigger clear bags. I have one of those almost fully stuffed, and still more yarn on the drying rack and more yarn to be dyed. So I will hopefully have a double booth worth of yarn to be able to have at DFW Fiber Fest, just a little over a month away. And then I'm continuing to work on the adventure colorways. I had shown you a few of those on Merlin, that base, and I dyed more on Merlin, and now I'm dyeing some on Camelot, the merino cashmere nylon. So the adventure colorways are one of a kind, speckled, variegated, just a chance for me to play around in the dye pot, not have to, repeat things over and over again, and just to get a little bit of play. And I'm also trying to think of them, especially if you're wanting to do something with a semi-solid, and then with something that's more variegated or speckled, kind of getting so you can have bases that are the same, and also colors that coordinate. So I pulled out 4 to show you, and I realized that 3 of them are very much in the pinks and blues kind of range of colors. So I've told myself that, not pinks and blues, purples and pinks and blues. I've told myself to put the purple dye away for just a little bit, and try to do some other colors. So right now I have something that's kind of in the yellows and oranges, and the dye pot I did a green. So that way I can have something that's not always purple. Love purple. I know many of you love purple too, but I do need to sometimes do things that are not purple. But I'm going to show you the first 4 on Camelot that I have. Again, these are one of a kinds. They will be available at DFW Fiber Fest, and then any that don't sell at DFW I will put on the website, and then I will continue to dye more for the other festivals that I have throughout the year. And when I dye them for the festivals, they will not go on the website first. They will go to the festival first, and then after the festival, any remaining I will put on the website. So those of you going to the festivals, it's kind of a special treat for you, that you get kind of first shot at these. But I know that not everyone can make it to the festivals, so I do want to try to have some that are available online if you can't make it to a festival. So we'll just kind of see how it goes. whether or not I dye some eventually for the website. If they all sell out and I have none left to put on the website, I might dye a few specifically for the website. So we'll see what happens. But the first time they will be available is DFW Fiber Fest. So here are the first few that I have on Camelot. So you can see the pinks and purples and blues in there. This one is definitely even more purple. So, got that one. And this one is less speckled, more I basically kind of pressed the, I sprinkled the dye powder over it, and then I took a plastic bag and kind of pressed into it to distribute the dye a little bit more. So this is a bit more variegated than speckled. So I have that one. And then I have something at least a little bit different from those. This really bright green with some kind of navy blue in there. So those are the first four that I have on Camelot that will be going to DFW Fiber Fest. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek of that. And then I also have more on Merlin. I think I have about 15 or so, just to show you some colors that are maybe not, let's see. So here's something that's not a purple color. Got that. I've got, here's something that's more pink, but not really so much purple in there. So these are the Merlin base. So I've got some of those as well. So I'm planning on doing more on Camelot and then a few on Cornwall, which is my DK base, because there are, especially with hats, there are a lot of brioche patterns that are using DK weight yarn. And like I said, I really like using a speckled yarn with a semi-solid for brioche. So I want to put a few on Cornwall, so you can have some speckled yarn with DK weight if you like to do that, especially for brioche. So that's the plan for the speckled yarn. Then I also have, there was a yarn that I sent out to the yarn club that was this yarn that had one ply that was a dark color, so that way when you dyed it, the dark color pretty much stayed dark, and then the ply that was the lighter color is one that got the dye. And the yarn club got a green, very similar to this green. And I think I had like 11 or 12 skeins left over of this yarn, so I have been dyeing it up. So there's it in green, I've got it in blue, and I did the whole rainbow. I've got a yellow, purple, an orange, and down here is a red. My original plan was to break these down into mini skeins, so 20-gram mini skeins, and do a whole rainbow. So since I've got the 6 colors, and then make, since it's a 100-gram skein of yarn, if I break it down into 20-gram mini skeins, that I would have 5 sets of the rainbow, and then sell them as a mini skein pack. And then the remaining, I think 5 skeins that I have, I was going to dye in kind of more neutral colors, maybe not, and think about something that could potentially go with the mini skeins or something. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's what I should do. So I guess maybe I'm asking you guys, especially if you are planning on coming to DFW, do you want to see these, this rainbow as a set of mini skeins where you get all 6 colors in the rainbow, 20 grams, so that way you would actually have, since there's 6, 120 grams total? Or would you like to see a full-size skein? Again, I've got 5 skeins left, so I can do a few full-size skeins and the mini skein set, if you'd like to see it that way, or if you'd like to see the all of them stay as full skeins. Just let me know. Maybe this will be the survey that I put out in the next newsletter also, so I can get some more ideas. But I have not broken these down yet, so that's kind of waiting for my decision on what to do on that. And then I will have a little bit of that mohair silk lace weight that I'm using in that Birds of a Feather. I'll have about 20 skeins of that. In 20 skeins, I'm doing 2 colors, or 2 skeins of each color, so I guess 10 colors. So 20 skeins, 10 colors with 2 skeins each. And I think that's kind of the special stuff. I do have some new self-striping colorways that I'm planning on doing. March is pretty much the self-striping month. I'm almost caught up with a good chunk of the other dyeing besides the special adventure stuff. So March, I'm pretty much going to focus on self-striping, and I do have new self-striping colors that I have planned to work on. So we'll see how much of that I get done and how much restock of the current colors I also get done. So it's going to be a busy time between now and DFW Fiber Fest, but I have a plan, I've got a list. As long as I just kind of do a little bit every day and stick to it, I feel like I've got a better handle on things than I have in years past, at least I feel right now. Ask me again a week before Fiber Fest. Hopefully I won't be super stressed out, but I'm feeling a lot better going into it this year than I have in years past. So books. Here's the other nice thing about reading physical books. I can actually show them to you without having the glare of an iPad screen by showing you the Kindle version. So I finished the Darkest Rising series. Really enjoyed my reread of that. And I moved on to Avalon High by Meg Cabot. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She is the one who wrote The Princess Diaries. And I'm checking the copyright date of this. So 2006 is the copyright date of this book. It's a hardback. I bought it pretty much when it first came out. Yeah, I hadn't read it. It had been one of those books that was just sitting on my shelf that I had never read, and I finally read. So it is a young adult book, and it is a modern day kind of version of not so much the Arthurian legends, but a modern day story in which I guess the main characters from the Arthurian legends have been reincarnated, or however you want to think about it, into these high school students, and they don't know it at first, but the situation basically kind of leads them to realize that that's kind of what's going on. And I don't want to give away too much, but basically there are it's a lot of fun if you're familiar with the Arthurian stories. You can catch some of the references in it, and then kind of see what's going on. I think if you're not familiar with the Arthurian story, it's probably just a kind of a book about high schoolers, and it might not be quite as enjoyable if you don't get all of the references. Maybe if you are kind of more in the young adult age, it would be more enjoyable, but as an adult, it's the Arthurian references that really add to this book. So I'm glad that I read it. So there is a sequel of sorts. It is actually a graphic novel trilogy, so there are 3 graphic novels that continue the story, and I do own those. I have all 3 of the graphic novels, and I thought about reading those next, but I just wasn't really in the mood to read something in a graphic novel format, so I kind of have those set aside to read at some point, but not quite yet. Hang on just a second. Wally is climbing up to something I want to get him away from. So Wally was headed over to my photo box area where I keep those little figurines and knights and ladies that I use in my photos. He was pretty much going to sweep all of them onto the floor, so I had to go rescue them. Anyway, so eventually at some point I will probably read the graphic novel continuation of Avalon High. Apparently there was also, I think it was a TV miniseries or a made-for-TV movie or something that was made based on it, and maybe if I can track that down, I might watch it. Not really sure. But it was enjoyable, and I'm glad that I finally read it. And again, the reason I haven't read it is because I had the hard copy, but and so since I thought I had the hard copy, I didn't need to get the ebook version, and since I was only reading ebooks, I just never got around to reading it. So another series of books that I have in hard copy format, and I mentioned this last time, that I've read only a few of, but hadn't read the whole series, is Discworld. So Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. And I've decided that it is time to read Discworld. I've wanted to for so long. Like I said, I read a few books, but not very many of them, maybe about 5, I think, total Discworld books. And so now I want to read all of them. I looked up several different suggested reading orders for Discworld, and I finally decided that I'm just going to read them in publication order. So the first one is The Color of Magic. And this one is a shorter one. I haven't gotten very far into it yet, but I'm enjoying it so far. This is a Rincewind. What is the character's name? Rincewind. There he is. I kept thinking Rinceward. I'm like, that's not right. Rincewind book. Rincewind is a kind of failed wizard. So there are definitely funny moments. So far, of the books that I've read so far, my favorite character is Death. I think I've actually read Mort twice because I really enjoy the whole Death character. So I'm looking forward to getting to those books. But I'm going to read them in, like I said, in publication order. So this one is first. And I think that I think this is one that I have read before. Parts of it are kind of coming back to me, but I don't remember very much of it. So even ones that I have read, I'm just going to reread. So that is what I'm reading, and will be a big task because there are a lot of Discworld books. I will probably read other books kind of in between Discworld just to break it up a little bit. But that's going to be kind of my major reading goal for this year. I don't know if I will be able to read all of them by the end of the year, but that would be really fun, and and it's nice to kind of have a reading goal again. I used to have a lot of reading goals, and I really haven't had that much this year, or in the past 2 years. So that's what I'm reading. As far as watching, I finally went to see the movie The Kid Who Would Be King, the Arthurian movie. I took Luke to see it. He had a Friday and Monday off, I think the weekend before last, so I think it was that Friday we went to go see it. When it first came out, he didn't want to see it because he said that parts of it looked like they were really scary, and so even though he had told me he was going to go see it with me, he changed his mind. And then I showed him the trailer, and he finally agreed to go see it with me. It was at the point where it was only playing like at one time at the theater. So I knew it was going to be out of the theater pretty soon. So he agreed to go see it with me, and so we went. And I have to say, I kind of agree with him. There were parts of it that Luke is 7. I think even for a 7-year-old, there were parts that were kind of scary, just graphically. Some of the imagery I think was pretty scary. So he was probably, he hasn't really like mentioned it since then, so I don't think it's led to any nightmares or anything. But that is something, if you haven't seen it and you do have younger kids, just kind of be aware that there are some potentially scary imagery in it. As far as the story itself, it was overall a pretty good story. I don't think it was like the greatest movie. I don't feel like everyone should go rush right out to see it, but I did feel like they did an overall pretty good job. They created some fun characters. There were definitely thematic elements. I think that were kind of hit you over the head thematic elements. The idea of people who are your enemies, people who are bullying you, that they probably have some things that they're dealing with, and that's why they're bullies. There was one character especially that I think kind of played that theme out. But basically of the 4 main characters, 2 of them were bullying the first 2, and they had to kind of get over that to be able to work together. So a lot of it was kind of the working together, even with people that maybe you don't fully get along with. And there was also a lot of kind of the world is kind of horrible and crappy, and it's the younger generation that's going to save us, which I'm kind of hopeful of that. But that was definitely an element, that it was a thematic element of the story as well. Because, slight spoiler alert, I mean, it's a kid's movie. They usually end pretty happily. So they do defeat the bad guys in the end, but there's a scene where they're like, but the world is there's still really horrible things going on in the world. Did we really do anything? And the message was basically like, well, you've still got work to do. There's still things that you just need to keep working at making the world a better place. So like I said, it was kind of a beat you over the head with the theme, with the lesson. But it is a kid's movie, and I think sometimes being more subtle doesn't happen in kids' movies. I really thought it was fun to see all of the Arthurian references. Like there was a street name that was Mallory Road, I think it was Mallory Road, and Sir Thomas Mallory is one of the big medieval Arthurian authors, which I'll actually be talking about in a little bit. So, you know, little touches for people who are familiar with the stories. That was kind of fun to be able to see some of those things, some plays on names and whatnot. So anyway, it was overall enjoyable. I'm glad Luke and I went to go see it, but it's probably not something that I'm going to rewatch or buy when it comes out. The other kind of newer thing that I've been watching is there is a new show on the CW that is basically a reboot of Roswell. So the new show is called Roswell, New Mexico. So the original Roswell series, when it came on, I watched it. I really liked it. I do feel like toward the end it started to go astray a little bit with just really weird storylines. But overall, I really enjoyed the original Roswell TV show. So much that I actually read several of the accompanying books. There was one set of books that actually continued the story after the show, so you found out what happened to the characters, and so I remember really enjoying that, just to get kind of some closure of what happened in the end. So I really liked the original show, so I thought I would give this new reboot a try. And right now I'm still watching it, but I'm kind of so on whether or not I'm really truly enjoying it. It is, when I say reboot, they're basically taking the same characters and the same basic setup, but they've made them older. So now instead of being in high school, I think it's 10 years later. So basically they're in their late 20s. And so there are definitely more adult kind of things that are going on. But it's not like everything that happened in the original series happened. It was, Liz didn't find out about, if you don't know this, and throwing these names out doesn't mean anything, but in the original series, Liz finds out in high school that Max is an alien. In this new series, she didn't find out in high school. She only finds out when she returns as an adult back to her hometown. So, like I said, it's the same characters, same basic ideas, but a completely different kind of situation and setup. And I think it's interesting enough. I think they've done some interesting things with some of the characters. Definitely it is got a lot of social issues, kind of current social issues that it's talking about, especially with ideas of immigration and whatnot. So I'm on the fence about it. I'm still watching it, but I'm not sure if it's going to be something that I'm gonna continue watching. It's basically, I'll continue watching until it gets to the point where maybe I'm just realizing I'm not enjoying it, or it goes in a direction that I don't want to follow. So on the fence about that one still. And I'm looking at my list. I think that is pretty much what I've been reading and watching lately. And oh no, there is one more thing. I need to add this to the list. I finally saw the second Fantastic Beasts movie. So that I missed it when it was in the theaters. So I finally sat down and watched it, and I can understand it critically as far as reviews. The reviews were kind of on the slightly more negative side than positive, and I can see where that might happen, because it felt like this movie was not as cohesive of a story with the beginning, middle, and end like the first movie was. It really felt like it was more of a setup for what is to come later in this series of movies, really putting all the pieces into play, and getting all the characters set up. But as far as the character development, that was very much there. There's I don't want to give away any spoilers if you haven't seen it, but just in the end, there's a really heartbreaking moment. There are probably several, but one in particular that I'm thinking of, and just really laying out the character arcs and how each character gets to the point where they are from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. So like I said, it's more of a setup type of movie rather than a plot-based, you know, beginning, middle, and end type of movie. I still enjoyed it. I'll probably need to watch it again to kind of pick up a lot of the details. But I know that because it didn't get as good of reviews, they've delayed the third movie. So hopefully they are still working on it and will release it eventually. But because I do think that, like I said, I do think that is leading, all the setup is leading to the next thing. So so I think that it will get more back to the action and plot. But that's not always what's important. Character development really is important, but unfortunately, you know, when people just look at, you know, box office numbers and whatnot, that doesn't always translate as well. Okay, so now I feel like I'm kind of rambling a little bit. So that's it for what I'm reading and watching. There is one question in the Questions for Karen thread this time. It comes from Miss Porter, who asks, I have never read any Arthurian literature, but you have really gotten me interested in looking into this. I've done a search and was overwhelmed by what is out there. Totally get it. I have no idea where to start. Could you please recommend a book title and author for someone who knows nothing about King Arthur and the stories associated with him? Thank you. Leslie. Okay, Leslie and everyone else. The Arthurian literature spans so many different stories, so many different versions of stories. It is very natural to feel overwhelmed by it. So I started thinking, okay, if I were brand new, where would I start? And so I'm going to give you two options for where I think you should start. One is going to be more of a medieval option, and one is going to be more of a modern day option. So part of the problem is that there are very few stories that really kind of span the whole, like, beginning, middle, and end of the King Arthur story. And even just like where it begins is questionable, because do you begin with Arthur, or do you begin with his father, or do you begin even before him? Where do you end? Do you end when Arthur dies? Do you end with, you know, even further beyond that? So you know, wide range of different stories, and some only focus on small sections. So to get kind of the fullest range of the story and the fullest, you know, beginning, middle, and end, I think that the best medieval version is Sir Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur. This is complete works because technically people divide it, so I actually turn it to a section into these big sections, which are kind of books in and of themselves. You can see this is a pretty thick book. But Sir Thomas Malory basically he collected a lot of different medieval sources and kind of put them all together. Some French sources and some English sources, and kind of created the whole story, at least as he saw it, from beginning, middle, and end. I had a professor in graduate school in my master's program who basically likened Malory to thinking about an hourglass. So you've got everything that comes before, so thinking about the shape of an hourglass, and it comes into the center and then goes out again. So everything that comes before all the medieval stories, the center part is Malory. So kind of everything goes into Malory, and then a lot of things that came after Malory, especially our modern stories, come out of Malory. So Malory is that middle point of the hourglass. And so I felt like that was a really neat kind of visual idea of the importance of Malory to Arthurian literature. So that is, if you want to get a more medieval version of Malory, where I would go. This is the version that most scholars use. It was edited by Eugene Vinaver. And so it is pretty easy to find, but this is going to be in the very late Middle English, very early Modern English. So it might not be as easy to read. So I'll just kind of show you. Hopefully this will focus. Give you a few seconds to maybe look at some of the wording. if you read it out loud, it actually is, and try, don't try to put any type of accent on it. It's really not that difficult. So then all the people fell down on her knees and cried King Arthur mercy. The words don't look like that. If I try to say it, then all the people fell down on her knees and cried King Arthur mercy. So that's, wow, I haven't done that in a while, so hopefully that's somewhat similar. But again, if you kind of read it out loud just with a modern day accent, usually you'll get most of it. But I know that might be a little intimidating to some people. So there are some translations into modern English, and the one that I would recommend is this one by Dorsey Armstrong, who actually happened to be my dissertation advisor. She has done a modern English translation, so popped open to the start of Tristram, the story of Tristan. So this is a modern English version, probably much, much easier to read. So if you want to try to read Malory, I would recommend Dory's translation, Dorsey Armstrong, her translation of Malory's Morte d'Arthur. So that is honestly kind of one of the places that I would start. There are sections of Malory that get a little bit confusing. Especially the Tristan story, he kind of starts it and he seems to not necessarily completely end it. Anyway, I've never actually sat down and read Malory all the way through from beginning to end. It's always been, bits and pieces here. I've read all of Malory, just not in one, like, beginning, middle, and end sitting. So that might also be something that I do for myself. Just sit down and read it from the beginning. So that will get you an overview of Arthurian literature. But if you want something that's more modern, that maybe is a little bit easier, even in the modern English translation, I think one of the modern day versions that is the best as far as giving you the overall story is The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. And this is one of my favorite books. Not just one of my favorite Arthurian books, but one of my favorite books, period. And this tells the story of King Arthur through the point of view of the women of the story. And so it is going to have kind of have that focus and that lens on the story. And there are, all authors are going to take their own view of the story and shape the story their own way. So there's not, even just in medieval literature, there is not really a definitive, this is the King Arthur story. There are variations even in the Middle Ages. So this does have variations on the different parts of the story, but overall this will give you the shape of the Arthurian story, I think. Again, from the point of view of the women, which is a little bit different because usually mostly focused on the knights with the other stories, but that probably would get you a good kind of entryway into the Arthurian stories. And then once you've done that, if you really decide you like the character of Merlin, there are some more modern stories of Merlin that you can focus on. If you really like Gawain, there are some modern day stories that focus on Gawain. If you really like Guinevere, there are other stories that focus on her, several different ones that I can think of. So they're kind of depending on what you figure out that you might like to pursue afterwards. There are so many other recommendations that I could go from there, but I think these two, so either your medieval Malory in translation or The Mists of Avalon, would be a good opening, from somebody who has never read any Arthurian literature and has no idea beyond, maybe some of the things that I share. Those seem to be good entry points. I thought of other books that might be good entry points too, but I decided to fall back on The Mists of Avalon since it is one of my favorite books. So might as well recommend something that I really, really enjoy. And I'm kind of thinking, so I think I mentioned it on the podcast. I know I mentioned it in the newsletter a couple of weeks ago, of thinking about doing a yarn club that was also a read-along. And I think that Mists of Avalon might might be the book that goes with that, because again, I think it is the one that is easiest to get into for people, no matter where they are in their knowledge of Arthurian literature. So not 100%, not even, I don't even know yet like when that would potentially start, but I'm kind of leaning toward this as the yarn club read along type of thing. Because it is divided into, I think it's 4 different parts, 4 different main sections. So, we could split it and read like a section every month or 2. It is a lengthier book, but hopefully we would be able to get through it. So that's where I'm leaning on that as well. But those would be my recommendations. So thank you, Leslie, for the question. If you do read those and you want to read more, I have lots more recommendations, but that's really where I'd start. And if you're trying to decide Mallory or Marion Zimmer Bradley, probably start with the Mists of Avalon. And then if you want to get more of, okay, so that was kind of the female-centric view, now what is more of what was going on in the Middle Ages, and then I would go to Mallory and read Le Morte d'Arthur. So we're still in our first quarter knit along, crochet along. The theme is to finish any project that has been hanging over your head. So something that you started years ago that you want to finally finish, a Christmas gift that you haven't finished yet that you need to get done, something that you've been thinking about working on, like you've had the yarn and the pattern ready for 3 years and you still haven't cast on. That could be something that you start and finish, or even frogging a project that has been on your needles that you finally admit just is not working. Frogging is finishing, so that can count as well. There's been some great projects finished, a couple of projects frogged. You can go see over on the FO thread. You can go to the chat thread and talk about your progress. And in the chat thread, I finally posted the prizes. So I decided to do smaller prizes, so could be multiple winners this time around, since there are quite a few entries already. So I went and found a bunch of enamel pins. So I posted a picture of this, but I thought I would show them off on the episode too. So there are 5 enamel pins. I will pick 5 posts from the FO thread at the end of the quarter. So the quarter ends at the end of March. So basically on the beginning of April, I will do the drawing. So I'll pick 5 random posts, so use a random number generator in the FO thread, and each one will get one of these pins. And the same person can win more than 1 pin. So if you have 3 posts in the FO thread, you could potentially win up to 3 of these pins. So post all of your FOs. So the first one, and hopefully the glare isn't too horrible on this, is a little one yarn ball that says, "Buying yarn is my superpower." I like that because I kind of think of the other thing that I've heard, that knitting and collecting yarn are 2 completely separate hobbies. So buying yarn is my superpower. Then there's this one that says 1 stitch at a time. Oh hey, there's an hourglass. I could have used that in my little example about Mallory. So little point in the middle, that's Mallory. Everything goes into Mallory and everything comes out of Mallory. Anyway, so 1 stitch at a time. I like that pin. And then this one, that's a nice little basket of yarn with both knitting needles and a crochet hook. I tried to pick things that weren't always so knitting specific. I wanted to make sure to represent crochet. So I was glad to find this. Then this one is knitting specific, but it is also because it is a sock. Several of the projects so far that have been finished have been sock projects, so I really liked the little sock there, stripy sock. And then I have to admit, this one is my favorite, and when I got it, I almost thought, oh, maybe there could be 4 prizes, and I'll just keep this one for myself. But I'm gonna put it in as a prize. So it's this sheep that is made up of little balls of different colored yarn. So I really like that one. I may have to buy another one for myself. So 5 prizes, 5 winning posts. Again, you may win more than once, so post as many of your finished projects in this quarter as you can. And come over and let us know what you're finishing and what you're working on. So that's it for this episode. Please either leave a comment here on YouTube or head over to the podcast group on Ravelry and leave a comment in the discussion thread for this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you have a different book recommendation for Leslie or for others who are exploring Arthurian literature for the first time. Maybe you have a different suggestion for reading order for Discworld. Maybe you have a suggestion of colors you would like to see in the adventure yarns. Help me get away from doing too much purple and give me some other color options you'd like to see. Anything you want to comment on, do that here or over on Ravelry. So thank you so very much for watching. I really appreciate that you take time to listen to what I'm sharing with you guys. But like I've said before, it's the hearing back from you guys that really is the most enjoyable part of this. So I don't feel like I'm just talking to my camera. I'm actually talking to you guys. So please come join in on the discussion. And until next time, happy knitting!